Doctor notices girl smiling. During painful exam, checks medical history and runs out of the room. The morning sun filtered through the blinds of Examination Room 4 at Boston Memorial Hospital's pediatric wing, casting narrow strips of light across the sterile countertops. Dr. Elijah Carter glanced at his watch, 8:17 a.m. He was already behind schedule, and the day had barely begun. Suppressing a yawn, he took a long sip from his coffee mug, the bitter liquid jolting his system to attention. 3 overnight emergency cases had left him operating on less than 4 hours of sleep. Dr. Carter, your next patient is ready in room 4, Nurse Patel said, handing him a thin folder. Sophie Anderson, 12 years old, referred by her school. Nurse for unexplained bruising and a possible sprained wrist. Elijah nodded, scanning the preliminary notes. Thanks, Rita. Any parent with her? Father's with her. Single dad, looks pretty worn out. Said they've been to 3 different urgent cares in the past 2 months. Rita lowered her voice. Between us, I'm a bit concerned. The bruising pattern is unusual. Elijah's expression tightened. After 15 years in pediatrics, he'd developed an instinct for cases that weren't quite right. I'll take a closer look. He knocked twice before entering, professional smile already in place. Inside, a man in his late 30s with disheveled, brown hair and tired eyes stood up quickly from the visitor's chair. On the examination table sat a small girl with copper-colored hair pulled back into a messy ponytail, her legs swinging freely over the edge. Despite the large purple bruise visible on her forearm and the awkward way she held her wrist, she offered Elijah a wide smile. "Good morning, I'm Dr. Carter," he said, extending his hand to the father. "Mark Anderson," the man replied, his handshake firm but brief. "This is Sophie." "Hi, Sophie," Elijah said, pulling up his rolling stool to sit at eye level with the girl. "I hear you might have hurt your wrist?" Sophie shrugged, still smiling. "Maybe. It looks funny, but it doesn't really bother me much." Elijah studied her face, noting the brightness in her eyes that didn't match the severity of the swelling he could already observe. "Mind if I take a look?" As he gently took her arm to examine it, Sophie continued chatting, completely at ease. "Dad says I need to be more careful, but I don't think I'm that clumsy. Things just happen, you know?" Elijah's fingers probed the wrist carefully, feeling the telltale signs of a significant sprain, possibly even a hairline fracture. The kind of injury that should have a 12-year-old in tears. Yet Sophie maintained her cheerful demeanor, not even wincing when he rotated the joint. "Sophie, can you tell me if this hurts?" he asked, applying slight pressure to what had to be a tender area. She glanced down at his hands, then back to his face. "Should it?" Something cold settled in Elijah's stomach, a familiar warning signal honed by years of practice. He kept his expression neutral as he continued the examination, discovering more bruises in various stages of healing across her legs and torso. Throughout it all, Sophie remained relaxed, even laughing when his stethoscope touched her back. "That's cold," she exclaimed. Mark Anderson hovered nervously nearby. "She's always been like this," he said quietly. "Tough as nails. Never cries, even when she should." Elijah nodded non-committally, his mind already racing through possibilities. "Sophie, how did you hurt your wrist?" "Oh, I was climbing the big oak tree in our backyard yesterday. I slipped on this branch that I thought was stronger, fell maybe 10 feet. She recounted the story as casually as if describing a homework assignment. "Dad freaked out, but I was fine. Just got up and dusted myself off." Mark ran a hand through his already disheveled hair. "I nearly had a heart attack. She just bounced back up like nothing happened, but her wrist looked wrong, so I brought her in." He lowered his voice. "Doctor, this happens all the time. The school keeps calling me in. They think I'm—" He trailed off, the implication clear. "I understand," Elijah said, though alarm bells were ringing in his head. "Sophie, would you mind if I talk to your dad outside for just a minute?" "You can. Check out those medical journals on the shelf if you'd like. They have some pretty cool pictures of skeletons and stuff." Sophie's eyes lit up. "Awesome." She hopped off the table without the slightest grimace, despite what Elijah was now certain was a significant wrist injury. In the hallway, Elijah closed the door partially and turned to Mark. "Mr. Anderson, how long has Sophie been like this, not responding to pain?" Mark's shoulders slumped. "Her whole life. At first, we thought she was just brave. My wife used to call her our little soldier. But after Amy, my wife, passed away when Sophie was 7, things got worse. Sophie would get these injuries and never complain. I'd find out days later when I noticed a bruise or a cut." "And you've taken her to doctors before?" "Multiple times. They either think I'm hurting her or that she's putting on a brave face for attention. One even suggested it was a psychological response to losing her mother." Mark's voice cracked slightly. "But it's not that. Something's wrong, Dr. Carter. It's like she genuinely doesn't feel it when she gets hurt." Elijah's mind was already working through a differential diagnosis. "I'd like to run some tests and check her complete medical history. Do I have your permission to access her previous records?" "Of course. Anything that helps." Back in the examination room, Sophie had indeed found the medical journals and was flipping through one, fascinated by the anatomical drawings. Elijah ordered an X-ray for her wrist and conducted a few more basic neurological tests, increasingly convinced of his suspicions. "Sophie, I'm going to check something, okay?" He took a small neurological testing pin from his pocket. "I'm going to touch your arm with this. Tell me if it's sharp or dull." He touched her arm with the dull end first, then the sharp end that would normally cause a pinprick sensation. Sophie stared at him blankly. Was something supposed to happen? Elijah kept his expression steady. "Can you feel me touching you?" "Sure, I can feel you poking me. It just doesn't feel like anything special." After the examination, Elijah escorted them to radiology for Sophie's X-ray, then returned to his office. As soon as the door closed behind him, he began typing furiously, pulling up everything the hospital system had on Sophie Anderson. The records were scattered across different facilities: urgent care visits, school nurse reports, a previous ER visit for a broken finger that had healed poorly. What he didn't find was any indication that anyone had connected the dots. When Sophie's X-ray results appeared on his screen, they confirmed what his hands had already told him: a clear fracture of the distal radius. The type of injury that would have most children in tears, requiring pain medication. Yet Sophie had smiled through his manipulation of the broken bone. Elijah began making phone calls, tracking down records from outside the hospital system. 2 hours later, a pattern emerged that sent a chill down his spine. Sophie had accumulated an alarming number of injuries over the years: minor fractures, burns, cuts, many discovered days after they'd occurred, all treated separately by different providers, none of whom had apparently considered the big picture. One name in the medical records caught his attention: Dr. Helen Chen, a neurologist who had seen Sophie briefly 3 years ago. He dialed her number immediately. "Dr. Chen speaking." "Dr. Chen, this is Elijah Carter from Boston Memorial Pediatrics. I'm calling about a patient you saw a few years back. Sophie Anderson?" There was a pause on the line. "Yes, I remember her." "What about her?" "I'm seeing her today for what turns out to be a wrist fracture, but I'm more concerned about her complete lack of pain response. Looking through her history, I'm seeing a pattern that suggests congenital insensitivity to pain, Dr. Chen." Finished. "I suspected as much when I saw her, but her father never brought her back for the additional testing I ordered. I tried calling several times." Elijah frowned. "Mr. Anderson seems very concerned about her condition. Did he explain why they never returned?" "No, but from what I recall, they were having insurance issues. single father, working multiple jobs. I got the impression that specialized testing wasn't something they could afford at the time. The pieces were starting to fall into place. Thank you, Dr. Chen. I believe we need to take action on this immediately. After hanging up, Elijah pulled up everything he could find on congenital insensitivity to pain, a rare neurological disorder that prevented the body from properly transmitting pain signals to the brain. People with the condition could suffer serious injuries without realizing it, leading to untreated wounds, infections, and progressive joint damage. What truly alarmed him was that Sophie's case had gone unaddressed for so long. At 12 years old, she could have already sustained permanent damage to her joints and organs. Internal injuries might be present without any symptomatic indication. The cheerful, smiling girl in his examination room was potentially in grave danger. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He stood up so abruptly that his chair rolled back and hit the wall. Without bothering to explain to the startled nurse he passed in the hallway, Elijah rushed out of his office, navigating the hospital. Corridors with urgent purpose. He needed to get back to Sophie immediately and order a full body scan. If his suspicions were correct, her life could depend on what they found. As he ran, his mind flashed to his own daughter Emma, only a year younger than Sophie. The thought of her suffering without being able to communicate her pain struck him with particular force. This wasn't just another case. Something about Sophie's bright smile in the face of a broken bone had gotten under his skin. He rounded the corner to find Mark Anderson pacing outside the radiology department, his face drawn with worry. When he saw Elijah running toward him, the color drained from his face. What is it? What's wrong with Sophie? Elijah slowed, catching his breath. Mr. Anderson, I believe Sophie has a condition called congenital insensitivity to pain. It's rare, but it explains everything you've described. Mark's eyes widened with a mixture of fear and, paradoxically, relief at finally having a name for what had haunted them for years. What does that mean? Can it be treated? It can't be cured, but it can be managed. However, we need to act quickly. People with this condition often have injuries they don't know about, and Sophie needs a comprehensive evaluation immediately. As the words left his mouth, a commotion erupted from inside the radiology waiting area. A nurse burst through the door, her face urgent. Dr. Carter, the girl, Sophie, she collapsed while waiting for her results. The world seemed to slow down around Elijah as he pushed past the nurse, Mark right behind him. Inside, Sophie lay on the floor, her copper hair splayed out around her head, her face still wearing that incongruous smile even as consciousness faded from her eyes. Sophie, she heard her father call, his voice seeming to come from far away. Sophie, stay with us. The last thing she registered before darkness claimed her was Dr. Carter's confident voice giving rapid commands, and the strange thought that finally, someone understood what was happening to her. As consciousness slipped away, the smile remained frozen on her face, the same smile that had just changed the course of her life. The hospital's emergency department erupted into controlled chaos as Sophie was rushed in on a gurney. Doctor. Carter ran alongside, barking orders while Mark Anderson followed, his face ashen with fear. I need a full trauma workup, CBC, chem panel, and page Dr. Winters from neurology, Elijah called out, his voice cutting through the commotion. And get me an abdominal CT, stat. What's happening to her? Mark's voice cracked as he watched. Nurses attached monitors to his daughter's still form. Sophie's eyes remained closed, but her breathing was steady. Elijah placed a steadying hand on Mark's shoulder. Her vitals are stable, which is good news. But with her condition, we need to check for internal injuries she might not have felt. He guided Mark to a chair just outside the trauma bay. Mr. Anderson, I need to know everything. Every fall, every accident, anything unusual you've noticed recently. Mark ran trembling hands through his hair. There's been so many Last month she fell off her bike and scraped half the skin off her knee. Didn't even mention it until I saw the blood on her jeans. His voice faltered. 3 weeks ago she was helping me cook and put her hand directly on a hot pan. I smelled burning skin before either of us realized what happened. Elijah nodded grimly. What about today or yesterday? Anything that might explain her collapse? She complained about feeling tired after falling from the tree. I thought it was just from the excitement, but Mark's eyes suddenly widened. Wait, she said her stomach felt funny this morning. Not painful, just different. I didn't think much of it because she ate breakfast normally. Different how? She said it felt tight, like she'd done too many sit-ups. Elijah's concern deepened. That could indicate internal bleeding from the fall. He squeezed Mark's shoulder. I need to get back in there. A nurse will stay with you. Inside the trauma bay, the team worked with practiced efficiency. Sophie had regained consciousness, looking bewildered by all the attention. Hey there, Elijah said, leaning into her field of vision. How are you feeling? Weird, Sophie replied, her voice small. Kind of floaty. Why is everyone freaking out? Your body's dealing with some injuries you can't feel, Elijah explained gently. We're going to figure out exactly what's happening, okay? Sophie's initial blood work showed anemia consistent with blood loss, confirming Elijah's suspicion of internal bleeding. When the CT scan results appeared on the screen, his worst fears were realized. A small tear in Sophie's spleen from the fall, slowly leaking blood into her abdomen. Dr. Vivian Winters, the neurologist Elijah had called in, examined the scans beside him. Remarkable she didn't present with pain, she murmured. Classic PSYPA presentation, congenital insensitivity to pain with anhidrosis. The lack of pain sensation is only part of it. Does she sweat normally? I haven't had time to check, Elijah admitted. The father mentioned she overheats easily in summer, but attributed it to her red hair. That fits. We need to confirm with nerve conduction studies and genetic testing, but I'm confident in the diagnosis. Dr. Winters studied the scan more closely. This splenic laceration needs immediate attention, Elijah nodded. I'll call surgery. Within the hour, Sophie was being prepared for emergency surgery to repair her damaged spleen. Mark stood beside her pre-op bed, trying to maintain composure for his daughter's sake. Will it hurt? Sophie asked, looking unusually small in the hospital gown. Elijah exchanged glances with Mark. You'll be asleep the whole time, he assured her, and we'll give you medicine afterwards to help with any discomfort. But I don't feel discomfort, Sophie said matter-of-factly. That's the problem, right? Elijah's chest tightened at her perceptiveness. Yes, that's part of the problem. Your body has a condition that prevents you from feeling pain the way most people do. It's called CPA. CPA, Sophie repeated, testing the acronym. So I'm like a superhero? A small smile returned to her face. Mark made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. Not exactly, Elijah said carefully. Pain is actually important. It's your body's alarm system. Without it, you can get hurt without knowing. Like my spleen, Sophie said thoughtfully. I broke it and didn't even know. Exactly. As the surgical team arrived to take Sophie to the operating room, Mark leaned down to kiss her forehead. I'll be right here when you wake up, kiddo. Promise you won't worry too much? Sophie asked, reaching for his hand. I'll try, he replied, his voice thick. Elijah accompanied them as far as the surgical wing doors, where he had to stop. She's in good hands, he assured Mark. Dr. Patel is one of our best surgeons. Mark nodded numbly, his gaze fixed on the doors that had swallowed his daughter. Why didn't anyone catch this before? He asked suddenly, turning to Elijah. We've seen so many doctors. It was the question Elijah had been asking himself since making the diagnosis. CPA is extremely rare, he explained. Many doctors never encounter a case in their entire careers, and without looking at her complete history, the pattern is easy to miss. But that neurologist, Dr. Chen, she suspected it years ago. If we'd gone back for those tests, Mark's voice broke. You can't blame yourself, Elijah said firmly. Medical care is expensive, and you were doing your best as a single parent. What matters is that we've identified it now. Mark dropped heavily into a waiting room chair. Her mother would have figured it out, he said quietly. Amy was the one who always knew when something was wrong, even before Sophie could talk. Elijah sat beside him. Tell me about Amy. She was a kindergarten teacher, amazing with kids. When she got sick, Sophie was just 7. Mark stared at his hands. Cervical cancer. By the time they caught it, it was already stage 4. She was gone within 6 months. I'm sorry, Elijah said sincerely. After Amy died, everything fell apart. I had to take whatever jobs I could find. Our health insurance changed. Sophie's medical care became reactive, only when something was obviously wrong. Mark looked up, his eyes haunted. I failed her. You didn't, Elijah insisted. You brought her in when she needed help. That's what matters. While Sophie underwent surgery, Elijah used the time to dive deeper into her medical history and research CPAP. The condition affected fewer than 1,000 people worldwide. Beyond the inability to feel pain, patients often couldn't regulate their body temperature properly, leading to dangerous overheating. They frequently sustained eye injuries from not feeling foreign objects or dryness. Bone fractures went untreated, leading to abnormal healing and early arthritis. Worst of all, internal. Injuries like Sophie's could be life-threatening before anyone realized something was wrong. The surgical update came 3 hours later. The procedure had been successful, but they'd discovered more than just the splenic laceration. Sophie had several partially healed rib fractures, likely from previous unreported falls, and signs of a previously undetected kidney infection. When Sophie awoke in the recovery room, Mark was by her side as promised. Elijah joined them shortly after, finding Sophie alert and already asking when she could go home. Not for a few days, Elijah told her. We need to make sure you're healing properly and address some other issues we found. Sophie sighed dramatically. But I feel fine. That's exactly why you need to stay, Mark said firmly. Feeling fine doesn't mean you are fine. Your dad's right, Elijah added. We need to run some tests for your condition and teach you both how to manage it. Am I broken? Sophie asked suddenly, her usual smile fading. Elijah pulled a chair close to her bed. No, you're not broken. Your body just works differently. Your nerves don't send pain signals the way most people's do. It's something you were born with. So it's nobody's fault? Absolutely not, Elijah assured her. And while we can't fix it completely, we can help you learn to protect yourself. Over the next 2 days, Sophie underwent a battery of tests confirming Dr. Winters' diagnosis. Elijah assembled a team including a neurologist, orthopedist, ophthalmologist, and physical therapist to develop a comprehensive management plan. On the 3rd morning after her surgery, Elijah found Sophie sitting up in bed, methodically examining her surgical incision with scientific curiosity. It's so weird, she said when she noticed him. I can see that this should hurt, but it just feels like someone drew a line on me. That's exactly what your condition is like, Elijah said, pulling up a chair. Your brain doesn't receive the message that something is painful. Dad says I need to become a detective of my own body. Elijah smiled. That's a great way to put it. You'll need to use your other senses to check for injuries multiple times a day. He pulled out a tablet. We've created a checklist app for you. Morning and night, you'll need to visually inspect your body for any cuts, bruises, or swelling. You'll also need to take your temperature regularly since your body doesn't sweat properly to cool down. Sophie took the tablet, scanning the list with interest. So I have to do all this forever? Yes, but it will become second nature, like brushing your teeth. She handed back the tablet. Is that why I sometimes feel so hot at recess, the not sweating thing? Exactly. Your body has trouble regulating its temperature, which can be dangerous. You'll need to be careful in hot weather and during exercise. A shadow crossed Sophie's face. Does this mean I can't play sports anymore? Elijah considered her question carefully. You can still be active, but you'll need to choose activities with lower injury risks. Swimming is excellent because it helps keep your body cool, but contact sports would be too dangerous. What about my bike? Dad got me a new one for my birthday. You can ride, but with extra safety gear. Helmet, elbow pads, knee pads, the works, and you'll need to check yourself carefully afterward. Sophie nodded, absorbing this new reality. Dr. Carter, am I going to die young because of this? The directness of her question caught Elijah off guard. No, Sophie. People with SEPA can live normal lifespans with proper management. That's what we're setting up now. But it's dangerous, right? That's why everyone's so worried. It can be dangerous if you don't know you have it, Elijah acknowledged. But now we know, and knowledge is power. Your dad and I and this whole medical team are going to help you stay safe. Sophie considered this, then nodded decisively. Okay, I can do this. Later that afternoon, Elijah met with Mark in the hospital cafeteria, away from Sophie's acute hearing. The father looked marginally better after getting some actual sleep in a proper bed, courtesy of the hospital's family accommodation program. How are you holding up? Elijah asked. Mark stirred his coffee absently. Better, knowing what we're facing. Terrified about managing it. That's why we're setting up a comprehensive support system, Elijah explained. Monthly check-ins with the care team, an emergency contact protocol, school education resources. The expense, Mark began. I've already spoken with our hospital's financial counselor. Sophie's condition qualifies for several assistance programs, and I've reached out to a few specialty foundations that support rare disease management. Elijah slid a folder across the table. These resources should help cover most of her ongoing care. Mark stared at the folder, momentarily speechless. Why are you doing all this? Going above and beyond? Elijah considered the question. Honestly, I've been asking myself the same thing. Something about Sophie's case resonated with me from the moment I saw her smile through what should have been excruciating pain. He paused. I have a daughter about Sophie's age, Emma. When I look at Sophie, I can't help thinking how easily this could be missed in any child. You have kids? Mark seemed surprised. 2. Emma's 11, and my son Alex is 15. Their mother and I divorced 3 years ago, but we co-parent well. Elijah shrugged. Maybe that's part of it, seeing another single father doing his best, in difficult circumstances. Well, whatever the reason, I'm grateful, Mark said sincerely. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't connected the dots. There's something else I wanted to discuss, Elijah said, shifting gears. I've been reviewing Sophie's previous medical encounters, and I'm concerned about how her case was handled, or rather, mishandled over the years. Mark's expression darkened. Some doctors thought I was abusing her. Others thought she was faking for attention. One even suggested she had some kind of psychological condition tied to her mother's death. Unfortunately, that's not uncommon with rare conditions, Elijah acknowledged. But the fragmentation of her care is something we need to address. I'd like your permission to write up Sophie's case for a medical journal. No personal identifying details, of course, but the pattern of missed diagnosis could help other doctors recognize SEPA earlier in other children. If it could help another family avoid what we went through, absolutely. Their conversation was interrupted by Elijah's pager. It's Sophie, he said, immediately standing. Let's go. They rushed back to find Sophie being examined by Dr. Winters. The girl looked perfectly calm, but a nurse was carefully cleaning blood from her forearm. What happened? Mark demanded. I was bored and tried to adjust the bed myself, Sophie explained matter-of-factly. My IV caught on something and pulled out. I didn't notice until I saw the blood on the sheets. Dr. Winters gave Elijah a pointed look. Classic case example. No pain response to the IV dislodgement. See? Sophie said brightly. I'm a teaching opportunity. Despite the seriousness of the situation, Elijah couldn't suppress a smile at her irrepressible spirit. You certainly are, Sophie. In more ways than you know. That evening, after Sophie had finally fallen asleep, Elijah stayed late to begin drafting her case report. As he documented the years of missed opportunities for diagnosis, a disturbing pattern emerged. Sophie's medical records contained multiple references to high pain tolerance, stoic demeanor, and even possible factitious disorder. One particularly troubling note from an ER doctor 2 years earlier read, "Father's account of injury mechanism inconsistent with observed affect of child. Consider social services consult." No one had fully investigated why a child would smile through obvious injuries. They'd been quick to suspect psychological or social causes rather than neurological ones. The fragmentation of America's healthcare system had allowed Sophie to fall through the cracks despite her father's persistent attempts to find help. Elijah's phone buzzed with a text from his ex-wife. "Emma asking if you'll make her soccer game tomorrow." He replied affirmatively, then paused, struck by the stark contrast between his daughter's life and Sophie's. Emma had 2 involved parents, excellent health care, and a body that functioned normally, warning her of danger through pain. Sophie navigated the world without that basic protection, with a single father doing his best against overwhelming odds. He turned back to his computer with renewed purpose, determined that Sophie's story would change how doctors approached similar cases. The medical literature on CIPA was sparse, focused primarily on the genetic and neurological aspects rather than the practical challenges of diagnosis and management. Elijah intended to change that. As midnight approached, a nurse poked her head into his office. "Dr. Carter, the Anderson girl is asking for you. Says she can't sleep until she tells you something important." Concerned, Elijah hurried to Sophie's room. He found her sitting up in bed, her copper hair a wild tangle around her face, looking surprisingly alert for the late hour. "Sophie?" "Everything." "Okay," she nodded earnestly. "I just realized something and I needed to tell you before I forgot." "What is it?" "When you found out about my condition, you ran out of the room." Her eyes were wide and serious in the dim light. "That's what the nurse told Dad. You literally ran." Elijah smiled sheepishly. "I did. I was worried about you." "No one's ever run because of me before," Sophie said thoughtfully. "Mostly they just get frustrated when I don't act how they expect." She picked at a loose thread on her blanket. "I just wanted to say thank you. For running. For caring that much." Something caught in Elijah's throat. "You're very welcome, Sophie." "Dr. Chen cared too," Sophie continued. "She gave Dad her personal number and told him to call anytime, even though we couldn't afford the tests she wanted. But then, Dad lost his job at the factory, and we moved to a different apartment, and I think her number got lost in the shuffle." Elijah sat on the edge of her bed. "Your dad cares about you very much, Sophie. He's been trying to get you help. For a long time." "I know," Sophie said simply. "He works so hard. That's why I never tell him when things hurt. I mean, when things happen that should hurt. He already worries too much." The insight from this 12-year-old struck Elijah forcefully. She had been protecting her father as much as he had been trying to protect her. "Sophie, part of managing your condition is being completely honest about any injuries or unusual sensations, even if you think it will worry your dad, especially then." She sighed dramatically. "I know. It's on the checklist." Smart Alec," Elijah teased gently. "Now try to get some sleep, okay? Tomorrow's a big day. We're starting your SIPA management training. Will you be there?" "Every step of the way," he promised. As Sophie settled back against her pillows, Elijah noticed that the ever-present smile that had first caught his attention had softened into something more contemplative. "Dr. Carter," she said as he reached the door, "do you think Mom would have figured it out? About me being broken? I mean, having CIPA?" Elijah considered his answer carefully. "Based on what your dad has told me about her, I think she would. Have moved heaven and earth to find the answer." "That's what I think too," Sophie said, her voice small in the darkened room. As Elijah gently closed her door, he reflected that in many ways that's exactly what Mark Anderson had been trying to do for years, move heaven and earth for his daughter. He just hadn't had the resources or support to succeed. Until now. Elijah returned to his office, the encounter with Sophie giving him renewed energy. He worked until the early hours of the morning, crafting a comprehensive care plan that would give Sophie and her father the support they desperately needed. Beyond the medical interventions, he included school accommodations, physical activity, guidelines, and daily management strategies. By the time dawn light filtered through his office blinds, Elijah had not only completed Sophie's care plan, but had also outlined the framework for a new diagnostic protocol for identifying CIPA in pediatric settings. The condition might be rare, but its consequences without proper management were severe. No child should have to endure years of misdiagnosis as Sophie had. As he finally gathered his things to head home for a quick shower before returning for rounds, Elijah realized that Sophie's smile, the one that had initially alarmed him, now made sense in a different context. It wasn't just a medical anomaly. It was a reflection of her remarkable resilience. Despite everything she'd faced, Sophie maintained an irrepressible spirit that illuminated the lives around her. That smile had indeed changed everything for her, for her father, and unexpectedly, for Elijah himself. 3 years passed like turning pages in a well-loved book, each chapter building upon the last. Sophie Anderson, now 15, strode confidently through the doors of the Boston CPA clinic, her copper hair pulled back in a practical braid, her medical alert bracelet gleaming on her wrist alongside a watch that monitored her body temperature. In real time. "Hey, Jenna," she called to the receptionist. "Is Dr. Carter in yet?" "In his office preparing for the symposium," Jenna replied. "He said to send you right in when you arrived." Sophie navigated the familiar corridors with practiced ease. The clinic had grown significantly over the past 3 years, now occupying an entire floor of the medical building. Colorful murals depicting nervous system pathways adorned the walls, interspersed with educational posters about rare pain disorders. Several of these featured Sophie herself as a model patient, demonstrating proper self-check techniques. She knocked on Elijah's door, entering at his distracted, "Come in." "You wanted to see me, Doc?" She dropped her backpack on a chair and plopped down beside it. Elijah looked up from his computer, his face breaking into a warm smile. "Sophie, thanks for coming in early." He leaned back, taking in the confident teenager before him. "How's the science fair project coming along?" "Almost finished." Sophie's eyes lit with enthusiasm. "I've been correlating temperature perception data from 20 CIPA patients with their genetic subtypes. Dr. Chen says the preliminary results are actually significant." "I'm not surprised. Your understanding of the condition is becoming more sophisticated than some medical students I know." Sophie grinned. "Well, I have been living with it for 15 years. That's a pretty intensive study period." This easy banter between them had developed gradually as Sophie matured. She had transformed from a bewildered patient to a poised young woman with remarkable insight into her condition. The girl who once smiled through a broken wrist now carefully monitored her body with scientific precision, tracking potential injuries with a smartphone app she had helped design. "So what's up?" Sophie asked. "Dad said you needed to see me before my regular appointment next week." Elijah pushed a folder across his desk. "I wanted to discuss this with you first before bringing it to your father." Curious, Sophie opened the folder and scanned its contents, her eyes widening as she absorbed the information. The International SIPA Research Symposium? You want me to speak? Not just speak. Be a keynote presenter alongside Amara. Elijah watched her reaction carefully. The medical community can learn clinical facts from doctors, but only you can teach them what it's actually like to live with this condition through adolescence. Sophie sat back, momentarily speechless. But that's in Chicago. And there'll be doctors from all over the world. 26 countries at last count, Elijah confirmed. It's the largest gathering of CPA researchers and clinicians ever assembled. What would I even say? Your story, Sophie. How your condition was missed. For years, how you've learned to manage it, your daily reality. Elijah leaned forward. Remember when you first met Amara? How seeing someone older with your condition changed your perspective? Sophie nodded slowly. It made it real. Made me believe I could have a future. Exactly. Now you can be that person for younger patients. There will be families there with recently diagnosed children, looking for hope. A familiar determination settled over Sophie's features. I'll do it. But I want to develop my own presentation, not just answer questions someone else prepares. I wouldn't have it any other way, Elijah assured her. You understand your experience better than anyone. As Sophie left with the symposium materials, Elijah reflected on the remarkable journey of the past 3 years. The Boston CIPA Clinic now served as a model for specialized rare disease management, with 46 patients from across the country receiving coordinated care. Sophie had blossomed from patient to peer educator, helping newly diagnosed children understand their condition through kid-friendly explanations and demonstrations. Mark Anderson had become an essential part of the clinic's family support network, counseling parents struggling with their children's diagnoses. His perspective as a single father who had navigated years without proper medical support proved invaluable to families feeling overwhelmed and alone. Lucy Patel had revolutionized their approach to transition planning, developing protocols for CIPA patients moving from pediatric to adult care. Her daughter Amara, now in medical school, returned regularly to mentor teenage patients like Sophie. The clinic had transformed Elijah's career, shifting his focus from general pediatrics to rare neurological disorders. The diagnostic algorithm he'd developed based on Sophie's case had already identified 11 previously undiagnosed CIPA patients across the country. His phone buzzed with a text from Mark. Sophie just called, bouncing with excitement about the symposium. Are you sure she's ready for this? Elijah smiled as he typed his response. More than ready. She's become our best advocate. The morning of Sophie's regular swim meet dawned bright and crisp, autumn sunlight glinting off the pool's surface through the large windows of the aquatic center. Elijah slipped into the bleachers just as Sophie's event was announced, the 200-meter freestyle, her specialty. He spotted Mark several rows down, sitting beside Rita Patel, the nurse who had first handed him Sophie's file 3 years earlier. The two had begun dating 6 months ago after meeting repeatedly at clinic events. Rita now wore her dark hair shorter, with silver strands beginning to appear at her temples. Mark looked younger than he had when Elijah first met him, the perpetual worry lines around his eyes softened by the stability the past 3 years had brought. As Sophie took her position on the starting block, Elijah marveled at how far she had come. Swimming had proven the perfect sport for her, the water providing resistance without impact, while simultaneously helping regulate her body temperature. With her coach fully versed in SIPA management protocols, Sophie had flourished, rising to captain of her junior team. The starting horn sounded, and Sophie launched into the water with practiced precision. Her stroke technique showed years of dedicated training, each movement efficient and powerful. As she approached the final lap, Elijah could see her pulling ahead of her competitors. "Go, Sophie!" Mark's voice carried above the crowd's cheers. Sophie touched the wall a full body length ahead of the second-place swimmer, immediately checking the time display. Her face broke into a wide grin. She'd beaten her personal record. As she climbed out of the pool, She scanned the crowd, spotting Elijah and offering him a quick wave before her teammates surrounded her with congratulations. After the meet, Sophie joined them outside, her hair still damp beneath her team jacket. "Did you see that finish?" she asked excitedly. "Coach says if I shave another second off my time, I could qualify for regional championships." "We saw," Mark confirmed proudly. "Those morning practices are paying off." Speaking of which, Sophie turned to Elijah. "Did you bring the new temperature monitoring patch? Coach wants me to test it during practice tomorrow." Elijah handed her a small package. "Fresh from the research lab, this version should be completely waterproof and provide continuous monitoring for up to 72 hours. The temperature monitoring patch represented the clinic's latest innovation, a collaborative project between medical researchers and bioengineering students from MIT. Sophie had volunteered as the primary tester, offering detailed feedback on comfort, durability, and functionality during athletic activities. "Sophie!" a voice called from across the parking lot. A girl with dark braids jogged over, swim bag bouncing against her hip. "Are we still on for study group tonight?" "Definitely," Sophie confirmed. "My place at 7? As the girl waved and departed, Mark explained to Elijah, "AP Biology Study Group. Sophie's appointed herself tutor for half the sophomore class." "They keep asking about SEPA," Sophie added with a shrug. "Might as well turn it into a biology lesson." This casual reference to her condition, so different from the confusion and fear of 3 years ago, struck Elijah forcefully. Sophie had integrated SEPA into her identity without allowing it to define her. She spoke about it openly when relevant, matter-of-factly explaining her precautions to new friends and teachers without embarrassment or apology. The following week found Elijah in his office reviewing patient files when Lucy Patel knocked on his door, an unusual tension in her normally composed demeanor. "We've received the genetic sequencing results for the Henderson twins," she said, without preamble. Elijah gestured for her to sit. "And?" "They have the exact same NTRK1 mutation as Sophie." Lucy placed the reports on his desk. "It's the rarest variant we've documented. The one that presents with normal sweat function but complete pain insensitivity," Elijah murmured, scanning the results. "Exactly. Only 17 documented cases worldwide." Lucy hesitated. "The reason I'm bringing this to your attention specifically, the research team believes this variant might be the most promising candidate for gene therapy." Elijah looked up sharply. "They're that close?" "The preliminary mouse studies are showing significant success rates. Dr. Whitmore wants to discuss advancing to human trials within 2 years." Lucy's eyes held a mixture of hope and concern. Sophie would be a prime candidate. The possibility hung between them, the potential to actually restore pain sensation in SEPA patients, not just manage their symptoms. For years, gene therapy had remained a distant theoretical intervention. Now it appeared to be moving toward reality. "Have you mentioned this to Mark or Sophie yet?" Lucy shook her head. "I thought you should be the one. You've been with them from diagnosis." Elijah nodded, his mind racing. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves. I want to review the complete research data before raising any hopes." Later that evening, Elijah found himself standing outside the Andersons' apartment door, a folder of research papers tucked under his arm. He had debated waiting until Sophie's next appointment, but ultimately decided that news this significant shouldn't be delivered in a clinical setting. Mark welcomed him in with surprised pleasure. "Elijah, we weren't expecting you. Sophie's just finishing up her study group." The apartment had evolved over the years, adapted to accommodate Sophie's growing independence with her condition. The laminated checklists had been replaced by a sophisticated home automation system that provided temperature monitoring throughout the space. A dedicated medical station in the hallway contained her eye drops, specialized skincare products, and first aid supplies. From the living room came the animated voices of teenagers, punctuated by laughter. Elijah followed Mark to find Sophie sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by classmates and open textbooks. So the nociceptors transmit the pain signal to the spinal cord through these specialized nerve fibers, she was explaining, pointing to a diagram. In someone with SEPA, there's a genetic mutation that prevents this transmission. But how do you know if you're hurt? A boy with glasses asked. Visual inspection, temperature changes, swelling, Sophie replied matter-of-factly, and I have this cool app that helps me track potential injury sites. She glanced up, noticing Elijah. Dr. Carter, perfect timing. Can you explain how the autonomic nervous system connects to pain response? These guys don't believe me. The casual way she integrated her medical knowledge into everyday social interaction struck Elijah anew. Sophie had transformed her condition from a frightening mystery into a fascinating educational opportunity for her peers. After the study group dispersed, Elijah sat with Sophie and Mark at their kitchen table, carefully explaining the genetic research findings and potential implications. So, this could actually fix me? Sophie asked, her scientific curiosity evident. Not fix, Elijah corrected gently. You're not broken, Sophie. But yes, theoretically, gene therapy could restore normal pain sensation by correcting the NTRK1 mutation. Sophie absorbed this silently, fidgeting with her medical alert bracelet, a habit she'd developed over the years when processing complex information. What would that be like? Suddenly feeling pain after 15 years without it? The process would likely be gradual, Elijah explained. The therapy would be administered in controlled doses, with careful monitoring of neural response. Would I still need all my management protocols? The temperature monitoring, the self-checks? Eventually, perhaps not. Normal pain response would serve as your warning system. Sophie exchanged glances with her father. That sounds both amazing and terrifying, Mark squeezed her shoulder. We don't have to decide anything now. The research is still ongoing. But they want me to participate when they're ready, don't they? Sophie's perceptiveness hadn't diminished. Because I have the rare variant. You would be an ideal candidate, Elijah acknowledged, but participation would be entirely voluntary. Sophie stood, pacing the kitchen with unusual restlessness. I need to think about this. Pain is this abstract concept for me. Everyone describes it differently. She turned to face them. Would it be worth it? Trading the devil I know for the devil I don't? That's something only you can decide when the time comes, Elijah said gently. The conversation shifted to the upcoming symposium. But Elijah could see Sophie's mind working behind her outward engagement, processing this potential new chapter in her journey with SEPA. 2 weeks later, the International SEPA Research Symposium opened at Chicago's Medical Research Center. Hundreds of specialists from around the world gathered to share the latest findings on diagnosis, management, and potential treatments. Elijah felt a surge of pride as he watched Sophie and Amara prepare for their keynote presentation. Living with SEPA, Patient Perspectives Across the Lifespan. Sophie had approached the task with characteristic thoroughness, interviewing younger patients at the clinic and collaborating with Amara to develop a comprehensive presentation that addressed everything from daily management to social challenges and future aspirations. As she took the podium, her copper hair now styled in a mature bob, Elijah hardly recognized the frightened 12-year-old who had first entered his examination room with an undiagnosed broken wrist and a puzzling smile. In her place stood a poised young woman who had not only learned to navigate life with a rare condition, but had become an educator and advocate for others. My journey with Keeper began with a smile that confused my doctors, Sophie began, her voice steady as she addressed the packed auditorium. A smile through what should have been excruciating pain. That smile was misinterpreted for years as stoicism, as attention-seeking, as psychological displacement. What it actually represented was an undiagnosed neurological condition that nearly cost me my life. From his seat in the front row, Elijah watched the faces of the assembled medical professionals, some of the world's leading experts, as they listened intently to a 15-year-old educating them about the lived reality of the condition they studied. The day Dr. Carter connected the dots in my case marked a turning point, Sophie continued, glancing briefly in his direction. Not just for me and my father, but eventually for dozens of other patients who might otherwise have gone undiagnosed. His paper on my case created a diagnostic algorithm that has identified SIPA in patients who previously fell through the cracks of our medical system. As the presentation continued, Sophie and Amara detailed the practical realities of living with SIPA, the daily inspection routines, the modified environment, the social negotiations, the career planning. They displayed the temperature monitoring app Sophie had helped design, now used by SIPA patients around the world. When they opened the floor for questions, a doctor from Japan asked Sophie about her thoughts on the emerging gene therapy research. "I've been giving that a lot of thought lately," Sophie answered thoughtfully. "On one hand, the possibility of experiencing pain like everyone else is intriguing from both a personal and scientific perspective. On the other hand, I've developed systems and adaptations that work for me. I'm not sure I want to trade that hard-won stability for the unknown." She paused, considering her next words carefully. "What I've learned from living with SIPA is that different doesn't mean deficient. Would normal pain sensation make my life easier in some ways? Probably. But my experience navigating the world without pain has given me perspectives and abilities I might not otherwise have developed." Her mature response drew appreciative murmurs from the audience. After the presentation concluded to enthusiastic applause, families with newly diagnosed children clustered around Sophie and Amara, seeking the reassurance that only those who had walked the same path could provide. Elijah hung back, watching as Sophie confidently answered questions, demonstrated her monitoring app, and exchanged contact information with parents desperate for guidance. She had become what Amara had once been for her, living proof that a SIPA diagnosis didn't have to limit one's potential. Mark joined him at the edge of the crowd, his expression a mixture of pride and wonder. "Sometimes I can't believe that's the same kid who used to hide her injuries from me because she didn't want me to worry." "She's remarkable," Elijah agreed. "You've done an incredible job, Mark." "We did it together," Mark corrected him. "You, me, Rita, Lucy, Dr. Chen, the whole clinic. It takes a village, right?" The phrase struck Elijah forcefully. That was exactly what they had created, a village to support children with a condition that had once left them isolated and misunderstood. As the conference drew to a close, Elijah found Sophie standing alone by a window overlooking the Chicago skyline, seemingly lost in thought. "Penny for your thoughts?" he asked, joining her. Sophie smiled, the same bright smile that had first caught his attention, but now backed by understanding rather than confusion. "I was just thinking about that day in your examination room. How different everything might have been if you hadn't noticed my smile was wrong." "Not wrong," Elijah corrected. "Just different. And full of clues for someone paying attention." Sophie nodded thoughtfully. "You know, I've decided something about the gene therapy." "Oh?" "I want to be involved in the research, but not necessarily as a recipient, at least not yet." Her expression grew animated. "What if I could help design better protocols for introducing pain to people who've never experienced it? From a neuroscience perspective, it's fascinating territory." Elijah couldn't suppress his smile. "You're thinking like a researcher already." "Well, I do have some experience with the subject," she quipped. "Besides, I'm applying to pre-med programs next year. This could be my specialty eventually." The casual mention of her college plans reminded Elijah how far they had come. When he'd first diagnosed Sophie, the immediate concern had been keeping her alive through childhood. Now they were discussing her medical school aspirations. "Full circle," he murmured. "What's that?" "Just thinking about journeys," Elijah explained. "How they sometimes bring us back to where we started, but with new perspective." Sophie considered this, then nodded. "Like me potentially becoming a doctor, specializing in pain disorders when I can't even feel pain myself." Exactly like that. As they rejoined the conference, Elijah watched Sophie seamlessly integrate with medical professionals 3 times her age, discussing research protocols and management strategies with remarkable confidence. The girl whose smile had once signaled a dangerous medical mystery had transformed that same smile into her greatest strength, a symbol of resilience and hope for others walking the path she had helped illuminate. The journey that began with a puzzling smile in Examination Room 4 had indeed come full circle, expanding outward to touch countless lives along the way. And while Sophie's story continued to unfold, one thing was certain: that smile would keep changing lives, including Elijah's own, for many years to come. Thank you for watching. Doctor notices girl smiling during painful exam, checks medical history and runs out of the room. We hope Sophie's inspiring journey touched your heart. What did you think about Dr. Carter's crucial discovery and how it changed both their lives? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story moving, please hit the like button to help others discover it too. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that blend medical drama with authentic human connection. Turn on notifications so you never miss our new uploads. Your support means everything to us.